I'm Logan Webb, and you're listening to TortureCast.
You're listening to a podcast by and for fans of the three-time world champion, San Francisco Giants. With hosts Chad King and Eric Nathanson. This is TortureCast.
It's Monday, August 19th, 2024, and this is episode 305 of the TortureCast, the podcast by and for fans of the San Francisco Giants. I'm your host, Chad King, and guess what? No Eric, no Willie today, but don't worry, I'm not flying solo. I'm joined by a special guest who over the last 25 years has worked for ESPN Radio, CBS Sports Radio, AP Broadcasting, Sirius XM NFL. He's covered over 4,000 games. He's been there for some of the biggest moments in Bay Area pro sports history. This includes every Giants World Series, the Warriors' 5 consecutive trips to the NBA Finals, the Sharks' appearance in the Stanley Cup, Super Bowls, you name it. Ryan Leong joins me, and he is the senior reporter and producer from Bay Area Sports Wrap, where you can find it at bayareasportswrap.com. My good friend Ryan, how are you today?
Hey, Chad, boy, thanks for the accolades. The check's in the mail.
It's really funny because, we'll give a little background here because I think it's totally worthy. Ryan's been just such a good friend, and I've really relied on him a lot because I am not a professional journalist and have not been doing this as long or frequently as Ryan has. Of course, he does this for his job. But I remember when we covered our first Giants game, and that was in 2011, and, I was just walking in kind of like, where are we going? What are we doing? And you were like the first guy who, like, everybody just kind of ignores you, and not in a rude way. They're just conducting their own business. And you're like, hey, who are you guys? Who are you with? Oh, let me show you around. And you like totally helped us out in the beginning. And obviously, we've been to many Giants games together. And then it even culminated again last night, or over the weekend, I should say, not last night, where I went to the Coliseum for the first time to cover as a journalist. And I texted you and you're like, yeah, I'm going to be there. I'll help you out. And you came out and met me in the Championship Plaza, walked me in, showed me where the press box was and the dining, how to get down to the field, and all that. So I really appreciate all the help over the years for everything. But yeah, I mean, your tenure goes way back, into even the 90s, because we're about the same age. And man, that's some cool stuff that you've been able to do over the years. I know it's old hat to you and I get it, but I know a lot of our listeners, would kill to like cover a game, and you've covered thousands.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate it, Chad. I'll say this much. I mean, I definitely enjoy it. I still like it, but it's just not as much fun as it used to be. There's been so many changes.
Sure.
I guess you could say just the world we live in, and I guess it started really with September 11th. But, it's kind of been used as an excuse. I mean, some of it's legit. Of course, people are worried about their safety and whatnot, but it's really made things much more like corporate. I think even for you, when you started in 2011, I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes with just your experiences of being at Giants games, and you've seen how PR has kind of evolved. If you could say evolved, I think sometimes it's devolving, but you know what I mean, right? You've seen the changes too in the years you've been there.
Oh yeah, I mean it's, we up until last year, we had covered 13 or whatever straight years of Giants baseball, 12 years. Being able to go into the press box and like you said, things evolve and they've changed their policy to not allow independent journalists anymore. And, it's really interesting because the Giants were very forward in allowing us and others to eventually come in and cover the games. And it was like, hey, the grassroots effort, this is fantastic. This is getting the word out. It looked good, all that stuff. But they said that with the explosion of social media and everything, and independent journalism, they've just fielding too many requests, and it was just too cumbersome. So for right now, they decided to shut it down. Well, it's funny how the A's used to be tighter about those things, and now they're, obviously approving independent journalists. And I'm not even covering the A's specifically. It was the Giants that I was applying for. So, and then just, corporate-wise, I've absolutely seen that change in that time frame. Things have gotten more corporate, a little tighter, a little less old school, I guess. I mean, certainly, Could you imagine, though, Ryan, like it even predated you, although I'm sure you saw plenty of stuff in the 90s and early 2000s. But like, being a reporter in the 50s, 60s, 70s, where they were drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes in the, in the press box and things of that
Well, here's a
nature.
good example. Let's use this as a Giants example. So I started covering the Giants in 1999, which was the last year at Candlestick.
Uh-huh.
So I was able to see uh, the same facilities that they were using for the press then, which was they had a place called the Curly Grieve Room. I guess Curly Grieve was an old writer, and the press room, which is the dining room for the Giants, was next to the Hofbrau at Candlestick. If you remember where that was.
Mm-hmm.
But what they used to do for the writers is they would have open bar. And Horace Stoneham, who was the owner of the Giants before selling to Bob Lurie, so we're going back a ways, right? So if you go back from the current ownership, before Peter McGowan, before Bob Lurie, the Stoneham family had the Giants since 1920. I think Charles was the owner in New York. Eventually, his son Horace took it over, and Horace was a decent owner, but the guy he liked the sauce. And so the writers would have, they'd have like open bar. In fact, I think almost all ballparks, there was a press room for the writers, and they would all they get sloshed after games. You wonder how many of these guys might have had DUIs, but that's an example of how things have changed over the years. Is that the open bar, guys drank a lot, or they would also go to places to drink after games, like a place like what was called Toots Shore in New York, which was like a sort of a New York, like not a sports bar, but sort of like a sports society place, restaurant bar place, and that was the kind of thing that writers did back in those days too. That kind of stuff is totally gone these days. And it's even hard to find alcohol anywhere these days. To be honest, I know when I cover the Niners games, they provide some beer after the game, and the Warriors have like a little mini fridge with beer and some like red and white wine. But anyway. That's the difference between then and now, as far as alcohol is obviously, as you know, a libation. It's not exactly something that's considered as accepted as it used to be, and certainly nobody smokes anymore.
No, that's out the window. Obviously, all the parks are non-smoking now, but
Which is kind of good. I remember when fans could smoke at Candlestick. That was not fun. That was especially one time. I remember a couple of fans. I was in the stands and they were smoking, and there was a game that was like one of the rare days where it was like 90 degrees in San Francisco. And if you're around somebody who's doing secondhand smoke at 90-degree weather, that's really uncomfortable.
It is. And what's funny is that you still see it on occasion, especially at fairly crowded arenas and sporting events. The last two times it's happened is I was at the NFC Championship game at Levi's Stadium, and I know you were there as well. I was sitting up in my season tickets, which, by the way, I also forgot to mention, Ryan also covered the Niners preseason game against the Saints yesterday, and I was there with my son in our season tickets, and Ryan came down and we chatted for, a good half a quarter or whatever and caught up. So I saw you 2 days in a row, and now we're talking 3 days in a row. It's kind of nice. But during that championship game, somewhere in the third quarter maybe, there was this guy who was just sloshed off his ass, and he just pulled out cigarettes, not weed or anything, just cigarettes, and just started chain smoking, just sitting right there by himself. And everybody kind of was looking at him, but he was just like this big, tough dude with tattoos all over the place, and it was kind of like the guy you don't mess with. You know what I mean? And so I was looking at him. He was about 5 seats down to my right, and with my son and I, and I'm like, yeah, I actually do want to drive home tonight. I don't want to get in a fight. And everyone else, I think, had the same attitude. And he just sat there and he smoked the rest of the game, and it was nasty. It was nasty. And then the same thing, I went to the Rolling Stone concert at Levi's once again last month in July. And, well, I mean, that's Rolling Stone. So it wasn't cigarettes. You know what it was. It was just weed everywhere. I mean, it wasn't one guy or one lady. It was everywhere. I was like, man, I'm getting a contact eye here. This is insane. But no, it's, mostly those days are gone, obviously, and it's changing. I wanted to kind of touch upon that because in my limited experience covering, a handful of games a year for the Giants, the one thing I've noticed, besides all those other things we just discussed, is a lot of the media is, I guess, a little bit more fragmented, and there's certainly more outlets and smaller units out there, and correspondents and people who just come to get quotes and things like that. And I've noticed some of these people are quite young, and a lot of them are not knowledgeable at all. And they're, quite honestly, asking some pretty uneducated questions of managers and players. And that just gets me, man. I don't know what it is, but it's like, man, I'm not a professional journalist, but obviously I know a lot about the Giants and a lot about the game of baseball. So I would know what questions to ask. Don't send me to a Sharks game. I wouldn't know what to ask, right? Don't send me to a soccer game. Same thing. But some of these people ask the darndest, stupidest questions. And I'm sure you've seen it too.
Well, there was one writer in particular. I'm not going to name his name, but he did ask Bob Melvin about the crowds at the Coliseum. That to me was an incredibly stupid question. Melvin was nice enough to say, "I've been here, with sold out crowds. Like, hello, do you remember where I was as a manager? Like before I came to the Giants? It's like that was probably one of the dumber questions I've heard in a while." But
Yeah,
in that writer's defense, I will say this: a lot of times they're going to ask from what they see. So I think the young reporters that are covering sports now are knowledgeable enough to know what to ask based on what they see, but there's so much of what they don't know in the history of things, and
sure.
some of it too has to do with the time in which you were growing up. For instance, so much of the Giants history I know about because I watched this. Teams used to make these documentary videos. You remember they'd sell them, and in fact, I remember the Giants dugout sold their copy of it, which was
Hmm.
called "A Giants History: The Tale of Two Cities," which is on YouTube. So I encourage fans, and maybe you'll put a link out there on Twitter, and I'll send you the link, Chad. So like, if people want to learn about the Giants' history in a quick 1 hour, that's the way to do it. Is to watch this documentary. So that's how I knew to ask questions about the Giants' history, and
Hmm.
so I know a lot about the team's history dating back to New York and when they moved to San Francisco and why they moved to San Francisco. But a lot of the writers now just don't know this stuff because it's just like they're like a lot of young people. To them, a lot of things don't exist before the year 1980. You know what I mean? So
Maybe even later than that, right? So,
even maybe, yeah, maybe later than that, but we'll just say 1980 for the sake of argument. But I think that's really where people get kind of lazy in that regard, and I think the only thing that prevents people from totally forgetting things are people that are historians or people who are interested in history. I certainly was. I was actually a history major before I changed to American Studies, and I just was. We grew up in a time where I think people kind of just knew more about things in the past. And I think
hmm.
nowadays, like I said, like I use your own son for example, right? You took your son to the Stones concert, and you told me he wasn't interested in going. Then you realized later, yeah, it was a pretty good concert, Dad. And
Yeah.
the Stones are a legendary rock band. I mean, they came about in popularity roughly the same time as the Beatles. So that's crazy. I mean, that means that the Stones really started hitting their peak in 1965. We're talking almost 60 years ago, right? So
Yeah, we had a 81-year-old Mick Jagger up there just dancing around like he was, 30 something. It was incredible. It was incredible. So you're right.
right,
Yeah, I was telling you
right.
about that yesterday. My son was really impressed by it. And before we get to the Giants, I want to ask you a couple more things. I love seeing you in your collection of starter jackets. And I've never collected them, but I have an original San Francisco Giants starter satin jacket from,
Mhm.
1987 or whatever in my closet. And I rarely bust it out because it might be one size too small. But other than that, I love that jacket. And then, of course, it went out of style, and now they're back in. You have dozens, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I probably have about 30 something. But I was gonna say, if that jacket doesn't fit you, it probably fits your daughter.
Yeah, you're probably right. Actually, she's
So a
taken
lot of times,
so many of my hand me downs.
right? But that's one for sure I've seen where like I've seen young people wearing their grandfather's or their father's starter jacket, and it looks
Hmm.
great on people. And I gotta admit, it looks. I mean, it looks fantastic on anyone. So the fact that you can take an item like that and pass it down over the generations is part of its lure, and I think collectability factor, and that's why. And I find out now again, yeah, they're super popular now. So I didn't because I only had one when I was growing up, and the one I had my mom buy me was the 1991 White Sox, which is at the time when they first came out with their current logo.
Hmm.
That was the it thing, and now that team logo has been around now for over 30, like almost 35 years.
That logo was so popular when it came out, and I was a big Frank Thomas fan. And okay, you know how it is. You grow up a fan of a certain team, but you appreciate other players as well. I loved Ken Griffey Jr. Right, loved Frank Thomas. I had a poster of him up on my wall along with Will Clark and the Pacific Sock Exchange and with Kevin Mitchell and those kinds of
Hmm,
things.
hmm.
But I bought a White Sox road jersey that has that cursive script Chicago on the front,
Chicago, yeah.
and it
And you
has
should have a white sock on the on
it
the on the
has the
sleeve
white
somewhere,
sock
right?
on the sleeve, right?
Yep.
But instead of 35 for Frank Thomas, I really appreciated Carlton Fisk at the time. So I
Yeah,
got number
72.
72 on my, and I still have that jersey to this day. And I used to wear that around everywhere because it was just so tight. It was new. It was just like the contrast, the black, white, and gray was just so nice. It is funny how that script, the Sox logo on the hat, and everything has stayed around since the early 90s because it is kind of a timeless, look as opposed to, Arizona Diamondbacks and Florida Marlins or Miami Marlins, whatever they're called now,
Yeah.
where they're
Well, we
changing
can
their
tie that in
logos
later
and
to,
colors every 2 years.
right? We can tie that in later to the fact that that's who the Giants are playing this week in
That's
their
true.
homestand before they go on the road is the lowly White Sox, and they are just a pathetic franchise. Oh my goodness! I mean, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about the A's, but as much of the problem as the A's are having, the White Sox are just such a directionless franchise. But the one big difference for them, at least, is they're not moving out of town. At least not
True.
yet.
No, no, no. And for all the Giants fans that complain about how horrible this team is, remember, they're in the middle. They're mediocre. The White Sox are not. They are, in their own class right now. They're
Yeah.
they're far below the 29th team. Let's just put it that way. The 30th
No, you're
place
right.
team is way below. So I don't know how
Yeah.
well they would do in AAA, to be honest. And then one more thing I wanted to ask you is, just covering A's and Giants for so many years, and you've been at the Coliseum, I'm sure hundreds of times. What do you recall as kind of a fond or favorable memory of the Coliseum?
I didn't start covering games there until after they'd already installed Mount Davis, and I remember hearing stories about how when they were first putting it in, because they were installing Mount Davis in the 1996 season.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine going to A's games, and every day you went there, you just saw the view get worse and worse because they kept building this monstrosity in center field, and they just kept slowly but surely taking away the beautiful Oakland Hills view that you had before they built Mount Davis. But as far as going there to games, I mean, of course, a lot of people remember the Moneyball year, and I do too, in 2002, where they won that then unprecedented 20-game win streak. I missed the 20th win because I had to cover a Giants game that night. The Giants played the Rockies, and they didn't have anybody there to cover that game really. And so I figured, all right, I'll go there because everybody's going to Oakland, and sure that it was an epic ending, but I was like, I was lucky enough to see wins 18 and 19, where Miguel Tejada, in the 18th win, I think he hit a 3-run homer off Eddie Guardado, who was then the Twins closer, and he hit a walk-off homer, and that was exciting. And then the next day, the A's, I think, were also on the verge of losing, and Tejada hit a game-winning single. And it was just, the A's teams have always been, from the time I can remember covering them in 1998 when I started to now, is they've always had really good team chemistry. The Giants have had some really good players, as you know. Of course, they won those 3 world championships, but the Giants clubhouse has always been very different, a little more stoic, a little more quiet. The Giants have had some character players, but the A's have had they've had a whole clubhouse full of guys who are just the most hang loose and fancy free guys you'll ever meet. And so I think that was part of the reason why they couldn't get out of the first round of the playoffs. I just don't think they were definitely very competitive, but I think they kind of maybe lack a certain focus that they needed once they got into the postseason, and they just didn't quite have it. And so that's been probably the big what if. If you ask a lot of A's fans, what's your biggest regret with being an A's fan, is probably the fact that they just couldn't get past. They only one time got past the division series, and that's when they beat the Twins in 2006, but then they got wiped out by the Tigers. I think got swept in 4 games, I think, in 2006. But that's as far as the A's have gotten. I mean, they've had a lot of success in the regular season, as I mentioned, but every time they get to the playoffs, somehow or another, they find ways to kind of mess things up. And the most recent manager for that was Bob Melvin, and so he's made some. We'll talk about his Giants moves, but the couple of the moves he made that were super questionable as an A's manager, 2 of them come to mind. One of them is he kept Derek Barton as his first baseman, and Derek Barton was a guy that I guess he had good on-base percentage, but he was never a guy that was much of an impact player. They've had other guys that could have probably played the position during that playoff stretches, and they didn't, and that just didn't work out. And the other big mistake I thought for sure was starting Liam Hendricks, who's a closer, as his opener for the game against the Yankees in 2018, and that was just a huge mistake. The A's gave up 2 runs in the first inning. They were promptly down 5-0, and then they got smoked by the Yankees. And then they had the last game, which was their last hurrah, was 2019. They hosted the Tampa Bay Rays, and they lost that game 5-1. So they came out flat, and they've just never been able to really put it together. And I feel really bad for A's fans in that regard, because they've had a lot of games where they'll get a big crowd and they just fall flat on their face. They just don't. They just don't perform to the level of fans that show up and all the great atmosphere that they have. And it's just been really tough being an A's fan. I really feel for them. I don't know of too many other franchises out there that have had their heart ripped out from them more than Oakland A's fans.
Yeah, it's crazy. this was, of course, the last time the Giants are ever going to play in the Oakland Coliseum. And if you've been hiding under a rock, you wouldn't know this, but of course the A's are moving to Las Vegas in 3 years. But in the interim, they're going to be in Sacramento next season and probably for the following 2 or 3. So, this is it. And it was really neat to see, Mark Canha and Chapman, collecting dirt and getting the third base and all that stuff. Because, they obviously had a lot of memories in Oakland, along with Bob Melvin as well. He didn't take anything, but he was really soaking it in that last day. But one of the clips I saw from Casey Pratt when he was doing a pregame show with Dave Stewart is he asked Dave Stewart, "Hey, we got a question from one of our listeners," and it was, would you exchange or trade your '89 World Series championship to stay in Oakland, for the A's to stay in Oakland? And Dave Stewart, without missing a beat, said, absolutely, 100%. I grew up in this place. It's such a part of my heart and my life, and I'm so sad to see it go, something to that effect. And so I know some other players feel the same way, and probably a lot of A's fans feel that way too. It must be really difficult, because I know as a Giants fan, we started to experience this in 1993, right? When they were threatening to move to Tampa Bay. And in fact, everything was but signed, sealed, and delivered. It was just about a done deal until Peter McGowan and Safeway and that whole group came in and bought the Giants out from under to keep them in San Francisco. And of course, that turned into what we have today down in China Basin. But I tell you, if they had moved to Tampa Bay, which granted is a little further than Sacramento and Vegas, it would have been hard to continue as a Giants fan, because part of being a fan is also being a fan of ownership and how the organization is run. And of course, we'll get to that too. There's some issues that I have with that as well. And you share it a little bit more independently in terms of your opinion. But yeah, I feel so bad for A's fans because of a very cheap owner who is certainly in it just for the cash and staying in the black. This is what he's doing. He's moving the franchise, and it's just discarding all of the fandom that has been built up since 1968 when they moved here.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the blame actually has to go to the Giants in a way when you look at the A's situation of moving, because the A's did the Giants a nice big favor in '92, which was they gave up their so-called territorial rights to the South Bay, which the Giants will not give back. When they were asked numerous times. In fact, KNBR on the morning show was kind of ripping on Larry Baer for this, which I was actually a little surprised, because not only does KNBR, of course, air the Giants games, but they're a partner, in the ownership. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting that they're actually, I guess to some degree, pointing the finger at Larry. I basically don't think Larry's, his image has not been as good since he had that little tiff with his wife that ended up all over social media. And
sure.
Anybody wants to look that up, they can go to YouTube and find it. So I'll leave it at that. You can go to YouTube and find anything you're looking for from the past on YouTube. Where something there lives forever. But that's the biggest thing too, is the fact that the A's have not had the support the Giants did. When I say that, I mean when the deal was struck initially for Bob Lurie to sell the team to Tampa Bay, Major League Baseball immediately stepped in and said, "No, we don't want you going there." And at the time, the appointed commissioner was Fay Vincent, and he's the last real commissioner, which is why baseball's got a myriad of problems now. Is because after Vincent was taken out, some guy named Bud Selig came in and took over. And ever since Bud Selig has put his fingerprints all over things, it's really changed the nature of the game itself. And I just think it's the worst irony of all that Bud Selig is actually in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. So
when people say, why isn't Barry Bonds in the Hall of Fame? My best argument is, yeah, you got Bud Selig in there, and he's the poster child for allowing all the, PEDs and steroids and whatever else enhancements you want to say that are ruining the game of baseball. He's in there. So you got him in the Hall of Fame. You got Tony La Russa in the Hall of Fame, and La Russa, of course, was the ringleader for the A's players doing their roids. Whether it was Canseco shooting up McGuire in the butt or vice versa. Anyway, I'm going on a little tangent here, but the point being is that the Giants at least had support to stay in San Francisco, and they were the first team on the West Coast coming here at the same time as the Dodgers. So there's a little bit different, I think, mindset as to why the Giants were able to stay in San Francisco, and the A's are unfortunately going to move to Sacramento. And we don't know if they're going to move to Vegas. The more and more time goes by,
right?
Nobody in the legislature, even in people in Vegas, don't want them there. They want their own baseball team. They don't want the A's. And I'm just surprised that Major League Baseball hasn't done more to do a situation like the Las Vegas Golden Knights hockey team, where they basically, I think, make arrangements for the franchise fees or whatever to be lowered in place of getting a new franchise. They made a lot of concessions for Vegas to get their hockey team drafted the way they did, and that's why Vegas has been enormously successful in the 5 years they've been, or 6 years they've been around. They've already won a Stanley Cup. The Sharks haven't even done that yet.
Yep.
And they made the Stanley Cup final in their first year. It's just crazy. So a lot of things are at play when it comes to politics and can change the course of things. And the A's have just come up on the, they've had the short end of the stick, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because the Giants definitely have a hand in it by not giving back the territorial rights to the South Bay, because that would have helped potentially with an A's move to San Jose, and they had renderings for ballparks down there with that hope that could happen. That said, I mean, A's ownership hasn't exactly indicated that they might do that, especially if they have a better financial deal by going to Sacramento. I mean, they only have to pay lease in Sacramento, right? And even the A's, they went back and tried to renegotiate with them for, what was it, $2 million a year? I mean, it was basically pocket change for him. And he said no to that because I'm going to Sacramento for free. And now they're going to a AAA ballpark. I mean, the Giants, when they go play the A's next year, will travel to their own AAA ballpark. That's the weirdest thing. And it's 17,000 seats. It's not a professional stadium. I should say, well, it's professional, but it's not a major league stadium. It's not going to have major league facilities. It's not going to have a major league press box. And it sucks for the A's players that have to endure that for a minimum of 3 years, because you're right. The Vegas thing is not even signed, sealed, and delivered either. And that's why part of it is surprising that Major League Baseball is allowing this to proceed without getting Vegas locked down. It would be like, no, you need to stay in Oakland. Pay your $2 million lease or whatever it is, which is nothing, and just stay in Oakland, right? But that's not happening. But yeah, regardless, the A's are gone. This is their last season. And another thing that happened over the weekend on Saturday was the A's Hall of Fame ceremony where they get their green jackets. And I was going down to the field to go for the manager interview with Melvin and then to watch some BP because I hadn't been out there before. And you went over to interview some of the Hall of Fame inductees. And it's funny that you mentioned Tony La Russa kind of turning a blind eye to Canseco injecting McGuire, because La Russa, who was there, is the one who introduced Jose Canseco on the field and even helped him don his green jacket. But, tell us how that went, because I know you talked to several of those guys.
Yeah, I didn't talk to La Russa. I figured I had time to do like 3 interviews. So I chose to interview Dave Stewart, Dennis Eckersley, and Jose Canseco. So I got Canseco for a couple of minutes. Didn't ask him too much because I figured he was just going to be overwhelmed, which he was. But I was lucky to be the first guy to get him. So that was clutch. My interview with Stewart was the most poignant. He basically did kind of mention that Oakland is to blame to a certain degree, because it's true. Once you've lost your third team, it's like at some point the blame does have to fall on the city.
Yeah, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah, but and I think where the blame does fall on the city is some of the city leaders just never really gave their support to the A's properly. One of which, what people may have forgotten, is Jerry Brown. In his term as mayor of Oakland, for some stupid reason, they had built up all these new condos, and they were, setting up the infrastructure for new restaurants and businesses. And for some reason, he took that off the table that the A's could possibly build in Jack London Square to have a ballpark. He said no. He nixed the idea, which was really dumb, because that's the whole point of building all these new condos and places to live anyway, is to try to draw business. Like, look at the Giants with their Mission Bay development. Anyway, he said no to that. Libby Schaff comes in. She's the previous mayor before Sheng Tao, and she was on the record for saying she was going to prioritize the A's staying over the Raiders. And now, of course, they're both gone. Although I will say this too, some of the teams didn't want to stay here no matter what. When the Warriors were bought by Joe Lacob and Peter Guber, they made it clear almost from the start that they were going to move out of Oakland. And even Dave Stewart in my interview says that. He says that the Warriors were a San Francisco team that transplanted to Oakland, which is true. And they came to Oakland for the same reason as to why they moved back to San Francisco. It was for an arena. When the Warriors played in San Francisco, they played at the Cow Palace, which is actually in Daly City. And they actually played sometimes at the Bill Graham Civic Auditorium. I know people go there for concerts, especially the young ones, but probably by your daughter's age, they go to a lot of concerts there now. The Warriors played there for some of their games too. But they moved to Oakland 5 years after the arena was completed because it was basically a brand new facility and it seated 15,000, which at the time that was a good number for basketball. Nowadays you would basically not move unless you have an arena capacity closer to 20,000. And Chase Center is at 18,000, but of course they have all these luxury suites. They can put a premium on each seat and create more demand that way. That's why their capacity is a little lower. But anyway, it's just sad that after interviewing three of those guys, I don't think Canseco said much about it, but Eckersley grew up, he's a Bay Area guy. He grew up a Giants fan. I don't know if you knew this or not, Chad, but the reason Eckersley has this famous sort of leg kick is he was trying to imitate Juan Marichal.
I did not know that. I knew he grew up a Giants fan, but I didn't know that part. Oh wow.
Yeah. So he was. I could tell Eckersley was surprised when I mentioned that during the interview that I knew that. So
yeah.
So he tried to copy him, and that's one of the things he did in tribute to Juan, one of the greatest pitchers of all time. And then Stu, it's sad for him too because Stu used to like sort of sneak his way into the Coliseum, and I think eventually once the players got to know him, I think Reggie Jackson would leave him tickets. But he was a guy that lived in the neighborhood of the Coliseum. And it's kind of it's a very rough kind of industrial area. But yeah, that's just such a rich history with the Oakland A's, and I mean I can see why though that they are leaving. The one thing I'll say about Oakland, it is a city that is generating extremely quickly.
Yeah.
There's just so much crime there. I have a day job where I have an office in downtown Oakland, and I just I don't feel safe being there. I mean, as soon as I can get out of there, I will. It's like, oh, my day's done. Okay, I'm getting out of here. I'm taking the BART and I'm heading right back to San Francisco. There's just so much crime there. There's so much like a lot of burglaries, and yeah, you just get this feeling that you just don't feel safe when you're in Oakland.
Yeah, my daughter goes to Cal, and I know it's a little removed from Oakland, but Oakland is just south of Berkeley, and Berkeley itself has the crime problems, probably associated somewhat with Oakland, but when there's things to do or we're driving through Oakland or we have to go shopping in Oakland, yeah, it's one of those, boy, I just don't feel safe here.
Yep.
Just, it's bad, yeah, the state the city has become. So yeah, I agree. In a lot of ways, I understand the move in terms of that, but with those developments that they had plans with down in Jack London Square and other things, you kind of had that sense that if everything goes right and everyone can kind of get on the same page and the funding can be put in place, it would be very similar to what happened with Oracle Park and China Basin and the redevelopment there, right? A waterfront park, redevelopment of the industries and the real estate around there. And over a period of time, 10, 20 years, it turns into a really, really nice place. Now, I'm not going to get political and talk about gentrification and displacing and all that stuff like that. That's for people that are smarter than me and know more about that than me. I'm just talking from the surface. The redevelopment appears nice and, functional and brings a lot of money in for the city. And for whatever reason, it just couldn't work out in Oakland. Sad to see them go, but go play your 110-degree day games in Sacramento. No, I'm sure they're going to have more night games because of that.
Yeah.
But okay, let's get to the Giants. So last week when Eric and I recorded, they were coming into this huge series with the Atlanta Braves, the team that they were chasing in the wild card. And at the time, they were only a game and a half back. And even though their playoff chances weren't great, they were still there, a little bit better than maybe on life support. And we said, you know what, if the Giants have a good week, if they win this series, we're going to record on Friday and we're going to be excited and go, hey, look, things are turning around. They're 5-6 games up by 500 now. They're tied for the wild card or in the wild card now. Things are looking up. That didn't happen. They did end up losing 3 of 4, 2 in heartbreaking fashion in extra innings. And it's those games that, if one or both had swung the other way with 1 or 2 plays, it could have been the Giants who won 3 out of 4, but at least split. And that's for certain. So that's one reason we didn't record Friday. And then, of course, the Giants and A's split over the weekend in 2 pretty tight games. But again, the Giants' offense is just flat. I mean, they're just on life support right now. Thank God they were able to hit a couple of home runs in the 10th inning and get some breathing room to close out and gain the split right now. But just summing it up, we'll get back to the Atlanta series and the Oakland series in just a second. But they're back at 500, 63-63, 4 games back of Atlanta in the wild card. And the Mets are 2 games back of the wild card. So again, they have to still displace 3 teams or 2 teams in front of them, being the Mets and Atlanta. And this is how far things have changed. You might think, well, that's not that bad. They still have some time. The problem is compression of time. The fewer and fewer games that you have remaining, the less chance you have of doing anything. Plus, you had your destiny in your hands. You were playing the team ahead of you. You could have controlled it with good baseball. That didn't happen. So they don't play the Braves again, and so they have to rely on other teams beating the Braves. Last week, these were their playoff odds, according to these three sites. Baseball Reference had them at 19.5%. So we're not talking great odds already, right? 1 in 5, 1 in 6. Fangraphs at 16.4, playoffstatus.com at 23. Today, Baseball Reference 7.6%, Fangraphs 7.1, and playoff status 8%. So as you can tell, the odds makers and the number crunchers have determined the Giants' playoff chances have plummeted extensively since then, which makes sense. And the one thing I wanted to talk to you specifically about, because we chatted about this over the weekend, was I think a lot of Giants fans were excited and looking forward to Bob Melvin being the manager. Certainly a fresh change from Gabe Kapler, kind of, thought of as more of an old school manager. Not that he doesn't employ new school tactics, but he's willing to adapt. But he's a little bit more old school and not as platoony as Kapler was, even though a lot of people say that was really more management, kind of directing a lot of that. But he made a couple of moves in that Atlanta series, which was just a little puzzling. And I understand the pros and cons of each one. And it was funny to see Giants fans argue about it on both sides of the issue. But in game 1, he decided, of course, in the 10th inning, they were down by a run. They have that free runner, that ghost runner at second. He decided, and I apologize, I forgot to look up who was at bat. I can't remember now. Maybe you can. But it wasn't Tyler.
Maybe?
It wasn't Tyler Fitzgerald. Most of
was it Yaz?
I'd have to look back up. I think it may have been Yaz. It wasn't someone who was hot, and a lot of people thought, hey, maybe he should have bunted the runner over, because some people say if you're at home and you're down by a run, move the runner over. He's at third with 1 out, and now you have 2 shots to knock him in with a sac fly, an error, fielder's choice, something like that. He chose not to. Giants don't score. They lose the game. In the second game, exact same situation, down by a run, 10th inning. They have Tyler Fitzgerald up. Now, granted, he's not Barry Bonds. We understand that. It's a very small sample size of a couple hundred at-bats. But he's playing like a Barry Bonds for the last month or two, right? He's definitely the hottest hitting Giant so far. And so it was just a little puzzling to see him call for the bunt. It didn't work out. He was out, and the Giants ended up not scoring, and they lost game 2. They lost 3 in a blowout, and then they won game 4 behind a 6-0 shutout thrown by Logan Webb, who's just on fire right now to avoid the sweep. And so, that's where you're playing on that razor's edge. And we were talking about it this weekend too. And it was very odd to see Melvin not employ the sac bunt with a weaker hitter in game 1, but employ the sac bunt with a hotter hitter in game 2. And it seemed like, if anything, it should have been reversed. But yeah, I mean, kind of sum up your thoughts on that.
No, I totally agree. In fact, I just looked it up. So it was Yastrzemski. He was the one that struck out. And then Marco Luciano followed him, and he struck out. And Patrick Bailey ends up lining out to Jorge Soler. Some irony there to end the game. And that's what happened in game 1. I almost feel like Melvin was like, oh, I should have done this, so let me try this today. And I'm thinking, no, I mean, again, for a guy he's got way more experience than you or I do, of course. Yeah. But I just think that's kind of a strange way to manage, is like having buyer's remorse, and you're just kind of hell-bent on trying this strategy simply because it failed the night before. Where every game's different. And I personally have always been under the school of thought that you don't want your best hitter bunting. You just, why would you do that? And then the next day on Wednesday, Tyler Fitzgerald, even though I guess they're down after Robbie Ray gets with a grand slam, who hits a home run? Tyler Fitzgerald.
Yep.
I mean, this guy is just really hot right now. He and Elliot Ramos are the only 2 guys in the lineup that are really doing anything for the Giants.
Yeah, it was odd, and I think this year has proven that Bob Melvin, at least to a lot of Giants fans, is not exactly bringing what we thought he would bring. And I know he doesn't have the tool set that the Dodgers have, or even the Diamondbacks have. I understand that. I just thought he was going to be able to squeeze a little bit more out of this team than Gabe Kapler, because Kapler had arguably a worse roster last year, and he started the second half well above 500. Now, we all know what happened in the second half. They absolutely plummeted in August and September, just had a horrendous back half of the season, and finished, 4 games under 500. But that's about where the Giants are kind of targeting right now, somewhere a little above or a little below 500 to end the season, kind of where Kapler was. So, and with an arguably better roster. So, Melvin has not made that impact that I guess I thought he was going to make. I thought that the manager could bring 3, 4, 5 additional wins to a roster over the course of the season. And I don't think that's been proven true.
No, over the course of the season, yeah, you're right. I mean, at the rate things are going, the Giants could either be equal to last season, maybe a little bit better. That's like that. Of course, that's not what you want. I mean, like you said, you hire a manager, and the manager manages, right? He can't play. That's why Casey Stengel used to have, kind of these funny quotes that are almost as funny as Yogi Berra. And one of his most famous quotes is, "I couldn't have done it without my players."
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds stupid, but it's totally true, right? I mean, he had great
100%.
players when he was managing the Yankees, and that's why the Yankees were this unstoppable, dynasty. And then when he goes to manage the Mets, they're the biggest laughingstock in baseball because he didn't have any players.
Yep.
So yeah, you got to have the right horses to work with. And I think the problem with the Giants is they don't have any players that really inspire anything, right? They really, like you said, the offense is flat, but the players to themselves, it's like there's just not nobody there to really provide that spark. There's no Hunter Pence like personality to really kind of get people galvanized. And part of it is maybe they just don't have the talent on top of that. But when you don't have the talent and you don't have inspiration and motivation to do things, I think that's why the Giants are where they are. They're probably right where they should be because they're basically a mediocre team. So 500 is average, and they're playing like an average team.
Yeah, no, they're average. And one of the things that really bit them in that Atlanta series, and many series to be honest, is the lack of hitting with runners in scoring position. And I know that over that Atlanta series, those first 2 or 3 games, they were like 2 for 32 or some ridiculous amount. But over the year, it's still, you think a mediocre team, most stats are going to be somewhere in the middle. Obviously, not everyone. Some will be high, some will be low, and that will average out. But runners in scoring position, they are batting a woeful 231, which ranks 24th in Major League Baseball. So, I mean, the MLB average with runners in scoring position is 254, so they're well below that. And that's really bit them in the butt. It's just that timely hitting or lack thereof that's killing their chances. And we saw it, in Oakland again. Granted, they didn't have many hits overall. I mean, the game that I went to with you, the Giants mustered 4 hits in 9 innings, and 2 of them were infield hits. So,
right.
I mean, they did nothing. They did nothing in Oakland. Again, thank God for that flurry in the 10th. But, right now, there's a lot of focus again on Farhan Zaidi. This guy came in, this is his, 6th season as GM, or he's going into 6th season, whatever it is. And by now you would expect some progress. And other than the 2021, which is now proven to be an outlier of a year, where everything kind of just worked together, the Giants are under 500, and as a cumulative record in all the other seasons other than 2021. And here we are. We're on the precipice of being out of another year of the playoffs, heading into next year with a questionable roster because of all these contracts that are signed, which are usually 1-1 with an option. And it's frustrating because if there's any momentum built by any of these players who do well, they're gone. And any of the players that do, shitty, maybe they'll stay on and have a decent year, but there just is no consistency with this roster. There's no longevity. There's just this rotating, turnstile of players, and the Giants lack an identity for sure.
Yeah.
And other than guys like a Logan Webb, right? And he's like the longest tenured Giants now, or because they don't have what they used to have, and so it's very frustrating. A lot of reporters, and a lot of these guys have been very critical of Farhan. Dieter Kurtenbach had a great article, I thought, 3 days ago in the Mercury News, where I encourage you to Google that and read it. It's very short, and I won't read any quotes right now, but he basically said Farhan is gaslighting Giants fans at this point, giving you false hope that is just not there, calling it, right after they the trade deadline, he came out and said, I believe we have the best rotation in baseball. Yeah, maybe after Logan and Snell, those 2 guys dominate with anyone. After that, you're talking about Hayden Birdsong, Robbie Raves coming off TJ, like, really? And then Kyle Harrison? That's not the best rotation in baseball. And then you go out and you trade away Alex Cobb, who, yeah, he acknowledged was and could have been insurance should a pitcher go down. And what happens? Hayden Birdsong for 2 or 3 starts in a row lays an egg, which is funny. I said that last week because Bird. Anyway, and he pitched better on Saturday, frankly. So that was good. That to see him kind of correct a few things. But there's just no positive movement here after 5 or 6 years, and he has a 2-year extension as well. So unless ownership changes their mind and decides to nullify that, he's around for another 2 years. And you have Blake Snell, who is pitching like his Cy Young, better than Cy Young at this point since he came off the IL. He's insane right now. He's got a 1.03 ERA over his last 52.1 innings pitched. In that time, he's only given up 20 hits. I mean, granted, that included a no-hitter, and 70 strikeouts. He had 55 strikeouts in the 5 starts prior to that. That's the most by a Giants pitcher in a 5-outing span since at least 1901. And now Bob Nightingale's already reported that Snell is indeed going to exercise his opt-out and return to free agency. And I don't think that surprises any Giants fans the way he's pitching. I mean, I would if I were him, right? So you're going to probably lose Snell. You have Chapman, who wants to sign, but it's going to rely on the Giants to give him what he deserves or wants to keep him around because he's had a good year. I mean, 19 home runs, leads the team. He's playing outstanding defense at third base. So there's nothing wrong with him. But other than that, they just, again, going forward, are going to have to go back out on that free agent market, try to find another ace to replace Snell, try to find another bat to help this woefully pathetic, anemic offense. And, in a climate where hitters do not want to come and play at Oracle, quite frankly. And so I don't see any good news on the horizon in the Farhan regime. I was a Farhan supporter for a very, very long time. I said, give him his space, let him cook, let's see what happens. It's been long enough, Ryan, as far as me, myself, a Giants fan, and now independent journalists are saying this, and you not being a, quote, Giants fan, I mean, what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, as you're just chatting right now, as you're making your point, I was looking up some stuff on the internet, which it's always great. We can look up things, and I was looking up payrolls for different teams, and I didn't realize that the Orioles have one of the lowest payrolls, and they're the tops in baseball, right? They're leading the American League. They're right there with the Yankees in the standings, and I think a lot of what the Giants management is doing. I mean, Farhan to me is just Brian Sabian 2.0 in a lot of what he's doing. So the Giants are spending money. They have like the 10th highest payroll in baseball. But so many of their guys are just not doing anything. I mean, even Chapman, he's playing solid defensively, but he's not doing that well offensively. And he's he got a 3-year, $54 million contract, and he's waiting on a long-term deal. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, how old is he? How is he now? Is he about 30, I guess?
He's somewhere
close to 30,
there.
I think.
Yeah, I think he's somewhere around there.
Yeah, but yeah. Oh, and here's another one. So the Orioles have a pretty low payroll. The Cleveland team, I can't call them by their nicknames. I'll just call them the Cleveland team. The Cleveland team is a $93 million payroll, so they're 28th out of 30 teams. The Pirates and of course the A's are dead last. But this goes to show you, if you spend money, that doesn't necessarily do it. And the Giants are spending money, so it's more than that. But the weird thing is they're not spending their money wisely, and they end up getting certain guys they pay lots of money for. And there's other guys that they should have gotten contracts for and didn't. So I don't know that I don't know how that ends up being rectified. I guess it still falls on Farhan because he's the head of baseball ops, but they've got to do a better job of figuring out how to build a roster because they certainly don't know how to do that.
Yeah, I think part of it, I'm not saying ownership caved to social media pressure and the fans, but they certainly were not operating in the realm of signing big free agents. And that, in years past, of course, they famously went after Aaron Judge and they had Correa signed, but of course he failed the physical. So you've had all these instances where they've gone after Bryce Harper, right? But it was always the bridesmaid, never the bride. And they go, oh, shucks, well, at least we tried, guys. We can't help it. And it was kind of like, finally you had a year where they signed a few guys, not as big as them. It wasn't as big as an Aaron Judge. My God, look at the season he's having this year, right? It's very Bonzian. You got a Chapman and you got a Blake Snell, the defending Cy Young Award winner. He comes out and just craps the bed for his first 6-7 starts, right? And it's like, oh my God, this guy, he's definitely going to be around on the roster next year because he's not going to pitch well enough to opt out. Of course, we see what's happening now. Chapman,
Right.
again,
Right.
great defensively. I expected a little more from him offensively. By the way, he's
Yeah.
31, so he's even a tiny bit older. Yeah, and he
Yeah.
turns 32 in April, so it's really next year he's going to be 32. And you know, you have Cleveland and Baltimore, like you said, who are younger with more flexible payrolls, and those guys who are playing well, their bill will come due as well, and they're going to have to make those decisions as independent ball clubs. The Giants saw that from their successful championship runs. All those guys had to get paid, and a lot of them got paid retroactively as a thank you contracts, right? Your Lincecums and Canes and Brandon Crawfords, they all got these huge contracts kind of after the fact, and then that really hamstrung them in the years going forward. And so now you're dealing with the aftermath. But I still thought Farhan, because he was so successful with the A's and with the Dodgers, that some of that magic might come over here. And then, you know, other than Patrick Bailey and Tyler Fitzgerald, did you know that there's no other regular guy on the roster that he's been general manager that they've drafted under his tenure? I mean, that's it. You're talking about 5 or 6 years, and 2 guys are regulars on the team. And one guy just recently, Tyler Fitzgerald, right? And if it wasn't for Lee's injury and other confounding factors, he might not even have had the chance to do this. So the proof is in the pudding, and there's no pudding right now. And it's just really frustrating. So I don't see what's going to change over the next 2 years. And, you know, I'm not saying firing him is going to make everything better all of a sudden. That's usually not the case. But at least we might have a better direction. At least maybe we won't feel gaslit as Giants fans, and they'll be a little bit more genuine with what they're trying to do. And then, you know, there was Bob Melvin, which, as I mentioned before, I was really excited and happy with that signing. I'll be very honest with you. But then you look at, you know, Stephen Vogt was another candidate, and he's just one of those guys. He's a former catcher. My God, how many former catchers are so good in terms of the managerial roles, right? And he just seemed like he had that baseball IQ, and I would have been fine with him as well. Not necessarily over Melvin, but now I may have taken him over Melvin because you just mentioned the Guardians. I know you won't mention that, but the Cleveland baseball team.
The Cleveland baseball team.
As of 3 days ago, they had the best record in all of baseball, and they're right up there in the top 5 right now. And so he's done so much with not the, quote, the best roster, not on what paper is supposed to be better than the Giants. And yet they are. So, you know, there has to be some effect from the manager in that regard. And so, again, with this roster, I don't know if Vogt would have been much better than a few games better, but it would have been interesting to see. I just think the Giants need to go in a different direction here sooner rather than later. But Giants fans, I encourage you to read that Kurtenbach or Dieter Kurtenbach article, because there's a lot of it where 2 years ago it would have been like, I think you're overblowing things. Now I kind of agree with what he's saying.
Yeah, and it seems like baseball is a game that's skewing younger for managers, except the one guy who's making that, bucking that trend is the Brewers manager, Pat Murphy. He's 65 years old, and this is his first time managing, and the Brewers are right on top of the NL Central, 20 games over 500. I really think that it comes down to motivation, because the one thing I'll say is this. I agree with you about Farhan. Not only is he gaslighting Giants fans, but he has a certain way. He has this weird sort of smugness about him. He's got this very sort of like kind of quiet arrogance where he's kind of belittling you when you talk to him, and he gives you this goofy, smug smirking and kind of chuckling when you talk to him. And I just don't know. And he talks in circles too. I mean, the few times he's spoken to the media, and I was at both of his recent pressers. I just think he's just kind of like that Jim Carrey character, where Jim basically bends over and talks out of his rear end. You know, that's Farhan to me. And then with Melvin, I find Melvin to be very uncertain. I really think he just is like. I guess I know this is the thing you talk more about with dating coaches, and they always talk about how women are attracted to men that are confident. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't feel like Melvin acts like he's a very confident person when he's managing. I mean, you only went into into his office that one time on Saturday, but you at least saw what he was like after a loss, right? Didn't he seem kind of like? What was your takeaway from him on Saturday, having experienced them both in a pre and post game?
Yeah, you could see it wasn't deer in the headlights, but it was just a melancholy, a self-defeat kind of thing, and he summed it up. And there was only 3 questions asked. It was a very short one, and it is funny how a lot of times I've noticed in the few games I've covered over all the years, I've probably covered 60, 70 games at the most, right? Where after wins, You know, the questions are more upbeat, more positive. The responses are more upbeat, more positive. Just human nature, makes sense. Whereas in a defeat, especially if the team's going bad, not if like, oh, we broke a 7-game winning streak, things are fine, you know, whatever. But it's in a lull, in a losing streak, in a we're not making the playoffs feeling kind of thing, where yeah, the questions are short. We were in that room for what, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, something like that, and we were out of there.
More like 3 total. Yeah.
Yeah. It was really short, and the way he summed it up was, well, you know, we didn't really hit the ball, but we had opportunities, and the difference was that Oakland didn't really hit the ball either, but they made their opportunities. They had a sacrifice fly and a single that scored a run. We did not.
Right.
And he's technically correct, but at the same time, it was kind of like, yeah, but you know, that's the problem. Like, how do you get these guys to start hitting with runners in scoring position and converting? You know, you summed it up with the obvious facts, but it's more over why do the Giants rank in the bottom 5 of hitters with hitting with runners in scoring position? Why is this, you know, a week over week kind of problem? What is going on? Why did Oakland not have a problem converting it? Anyway, I agree with you. It was very lack of confidence. Didn't seem sure of himself. It's almost like he's looking over his shoulder, you know.
And he's gotten worse. He's gotten worse too. I mean, I remember when the season started. I remember I made the mistake once of like asking a question that he'd already been asked about Kyle Harrison, and I remember he kind of snapped at me. He was like, "I just answered that question." Oops. But in a way that was good because that showed to me that he had like he seemed to have his hand on the pulse of this team, and now it almost seems like he's looking for a pulse. Right, It's almost like, not that the Giants are, you know, a drugged out person that you can't find their veins, but it almost seems like he's that person. He's like the emergency responder. He's like, "Where's the pulse? Where's the pulse?" He can't find it, right? And I feel that he's kind of operating in that way. Like he's just looking for this team's pulse. He cannot find where it is.
No, he can't right now. Well,
you know, and I was gonna say real quick. I thought too. It reminds me of when Bruce Bochy first managed the Giants. I know it precedes when you came there, but the first year or so that he managed the Giants in 2007, they didn't really start doing this whole thing with interview rooms for television. So they were still basically going into the manager's office like we did for Melvin in Oakland. Mm-hmm. And all the managers used to do that. This whole thing with interview rooms has become more of a maybe like around 2010 and since to televise all these pressers, and that's why they created these interview rooms. And it's also a little bit easier for all the media to get into one place instead of having to stuff them all in the manager's office. But I remember Bochy in his first year was, you know, having a lot of struggles because it was Bonds' last year, and they brought in Barry Zito, who was a disaster until the 2012 World Series. We'd go and ask Bochy questions, and he would give you this death glare and just stare at you for a couple seconds, and then he'd blink, and then he'd answer your question. And I was like, oh, my God. And he did that to a lot of reporters. And so but we all found out later that Bruce Bochy really was at a crossroads when he was with the Padres, and he had a career resurgence with the Giants, right? I mean, that's pretty much what happened. Although, you know, if you recall, too, at the end of his Giants tenure, he wasn't doing too well. And, in fact, his very last game that he managed was a disaster. Mm-hmm. Like, he got smoked. But didn't they play the Dodgers, and he got smoked in that game, right? It was a terrible blowout.
It was a horrible way to go out, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and then, of course, he comes back with the Rangers and wins in the World Series in his first year. So, I mean, a lot of it is it's kind of a crapshoot now. I almost find that baseball is becoming more and more difficult to predict just because – in some ways, because of all the analytics that go on, it's like how much is really being done by managing and how much is just, you know, I don't know, maybe Farhan's looking at a keyboard and a computer and typing stuff up, and then he's telling his managers what to do. Because I know with Melvin when he was at the A's, I mean, he supposedly had some freedom of movement, but at the same time, I was wondering how much Billy Beane was telling him what to do too. You know?
Yeah, especially it was the Moneyball era, right? I mean, that's when a lot of this really started. A lot of teams have now focused on those analytics, your on base percentage and number of walks, and all those things that I agree with on some level, but I also think there needs to be a mix with some of that old school stuff, like we just talked about with the bunting. You got to have a feel for your team, and Bruce Bochy was definitely a guy who seemed to be able to do that, because in those championship runs, he knew when to push the right button as far as the bullpen. He knew when to put the most random guy in the outfield, like a Travis Ishikawa in Game 7 of the World Series, right? Or against the Cardinals, where things just worked out in He just has a certain feel for it. And not every year worked out. Like you said, in 2019, it was a horrible year, ended it poorly. He wins the World Series the first year with the Rangers last year, and now look at this year. They're not making the playoffs. So,
Right.
it happens. And like you said, it's kind of a crapshoot, especially now with the wild card and the number of series that you have. I mean, you have the most dominant teams going in, getting knocked out in the first round or second round. And then you get, last year were two wild cards again, Arizona and Texas, making it all the way to the World Series. So, baseball is more about just getting in the playoffs right now, which is obviously where the Giants thought they might be able to go as of a week or two ago. But those playoff chances are now, analytically in the single digits, which puts them on life support, to be honest. They would have to go on some incredible streak because they don't really control much of their destiny other than playing a few games against, obviously, the Diamondbacks and Padres, but they're so far ahead at this point. It's probably not going to be, relevant. But, the only other good news as far as individual performances, we talked about Tyler Fitzgerald, who is still hitting very well. He's over 300 for the year with 13 or 14 bombs now. I mean, he's getting way up there in a very small sample size. And then you have Logan Webb, who always has his ups and downs, but he's always just solid and fairly consistent throughout the year. He always ends up with good numbers. Once again, he's leading the major leagues in innings pitched, so he's just a workhorse out there. And now he's thrown 29 and a third innings in his last, 6 starts, and he's given up only 2 earned runs, 17 hits. That's a 0.61 ERA. A 160 batting average against. He's lowered his season ERA from a 3.72 to a 3.17. So he's definitely in the groove, and he's going to be pitching against this White Sox team coming in tonight. And you were just mentioning how bad they were, and I was saying how much lower they are. Kind of the gap between 29 and 30 is a lot bigger than 29 to 28. But when you look at the standings, and they're still challenging for the worst modern day baseball season record. Right now they stand at 30 and 95. 65 games below 500, and on the road they've still only won 12 games. Ryan, can you believe that? They're 12 and 51 on the road. And so here we are. This is, this week is going to be against Chicago and I think Seattle later in the week.
Yeah.
And on the road, which Seattle's a good team this year. They're decent. But if the Giants don't sweep the White Sox, I hate to say it, it's a failure, even if they win 2 out of 3. I know the White Sox are going to win 1 out of 5 games or whatever, but this is where the Giants have to make up those lost games against Atlanta as much as they can. They got to crush these guys. But if you can't beat the teams in front of you, and you can't beat the worst team in one of the worst teams in modern Major League history, well, you don't deserve the playoffs. So there you go.
Yeah, well, I just looked up the numbers right now of the 1962 Mets, which that's who the White Sox are challenging. That team was 40 and 120, 80 games under 500. So just as you mentioned, the 12 wins, the Mets that year had 18 road wins for the entire season.
Amazing.
So, that's why they were called the Amazons. There you go. See, that's where the joke comes from. But when they became really good, that's why they then took that amazing moniker and it became something else for what it's supposed to be. It's funny how you just that was the first word out of your mouth. Was amazing. Exactly how people thought of them. But it's and another thing, I'll say this too. It's really hard to watch the Giants these days. I know they're not the worst team at all, but man, it's just like you saw it. We went to a game together that was just like this is the Giants in a nutshell. They're a boring team to watch, and it just doesn't inspire people. I'm kind of seeing it from a different lens because I'm in the press box, but kind of feel for some of these fans that are diehard supporters of the Giants. And I know you're a big fan, but you're not a guy who's. You can imagine there are some people still in this day and age that are still going to like a bulk of the home games. I wonder how they feel about going to games, and maybe actually we could touch real quickly on the situation too regarding Michael Harris II's grand slam, resulting in McCovey Cove Dave catching the ball and he getting kind of vilified by Atlanta media because he, I guess, asked the Giants for. Did he ask what I think he just asked for a parking space, right, in the Pier 30 lot, and he denied his request.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I saw some commotion about this. I have zero details on what happened. I just knew that there was some sort of issue with McCovey Cove Dave, and I just kind of ignored it because, I was like, I don't care about him. But what exactly happened? That's what it was?
Well,
I knew he caught the grand slam.
Yeah, I think he wanted to park in the lot for free because he said he wanted a job from the Giants, and the Giants said no. And then the Braves kind of pressured him into like basically giving him the ball or else. And I think I have seen that in other cases too, where apparently some teams have been really pushy about trying to get certain people to give back certain items back to players.
Yeah.
I think one even had to do with Shohei Ohtani or something like that. I've been reading various things, but yeah, I would say the truth lies somewhere in the middle between what's going on.
Sure.
I don't know him personally. I follow him on on Instagram, and he follows me back. But yeah, when he said he wanted a job with the Giants, I don't know exactly what he would have been doing in the how he would be employed by the team, but yeah.
Yeah, without knowing the context, just hearing that on the surface, that's a very odd request. Like, maybe he thinks of himself a little bit bigger than what he really is. I don't know, and he thinks he's important enough to come to the Giants to work for them. So, I mean, hey, if you want to go work for minimum wage for the Giants, go be my guest.
Yeah, I mean, I'll read more on this, but I just thought it was interesting. But obviously, in a situation like that, it should serve as a reminder to McCovey Cove Dave that this is a business. It's like
yeah.
Yeah. So
That's what it is. Oh, and by the way, I just wanted to say, I just did the quick math. The White Sox winning percentage right now is .240, which would put them at 39 wins if they maintain that. So they would be one game worse than the Mets.
The Mets winning percentage was .250.
Yeah. So there you go. They're still on pace to be the worst team, but maybe they'll go on a little streak. But
no, you're right though. If the Giants have any hope of trying to get some kind of respectability, it's funny too when they lost that series to the Braves. I don't know about you, but it reminded me of 1993.
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, it just brought up a lot of painful memories. I was at Candlestick Park on the last day of the Major League season in 1993 when the Giants were playing. Sorry, who were they playing that day? They were playing Were they playing the Dodgers?
They closed out with the Dodgers in LA.
Yeah, it was the Dodgers.
Right, but those games were in LA though. So I remember after. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
So I remember that last game. I actually was a fan then, so as well as you were. So I actually went out to the airport and paid a few bucks to park in the parking lot, and they waited for the team to get off the charter. And I remember Matt Williams emerged. Only a few players came out to talk. He was one of them. And I'll never forget. He came out and he addressed the crowd and said, "I don't even know if the Giants, of course he's just kind of talking to make it feel better. He says, I'll be surprised if the Dodgers win one game next year." And he got a huge roar from the fans. But I remember I wanted to attend one of the games against the Braves, and I just parked my car, and my friend and I had to eat our money for the parking lot because we couldn't get tickets for that game. I didn't buy them ahead of time, and we were trying to get something from the box office, and we just missed getting the ticket. So,
Gotcha. But
that year to me was a really special year. I know the Giants have had other years; they've won World Series, but to me, the most memorable year for me was 1993, just because it was the first year when they were supposedly going to move to Tampa Bay. They come back and win 103 games. What a magical year that was.
And that was one of the best offenses I've ever seen. I mean, that was so much fun to watch them just explode for runs all the time with Kent and Bonds and all those guys.
No Kent back then, no Bonds.
Oh, sorry, I'm thinking Bonds. It's 02.
No
I didn't mean Kent and Bonds. What am I saying? I'm thinking of 02.
No, in 93, but I mean 93
it was Matt Williams and Will Clark and everything like that. Sorry, I just transposed years. No, but they had one of the best offenses in Major League Baseball that year. And I was at Candlestick Park watching the 49ers play the Minnesota Vikings. And I remember my dad, who was working at the time, had his company had a little party in one of the luxury suites, if you want to call Candlestick Park having luxury suites. And we were watching the game, the Giants game, which they were in LA on the tube. And of course, the Braves finished off with the Colorado Rockies, who was an expansion team. They were an expansion team that year. And the thing that was really frustrating about that is not only losing by one game to Atlanta, of course, who caught fire, literally, Atlanta Fulton County Stadium caught fire. Fred McGriff was traded, and they just go on an incredible second half streak. And the Giants still played well. They just didn't play as well as the Braves. The Braves caught them, in that last week. It was the Braves playing the Rockies that really pissed me off. They were 12-0 against the Rockies. 12-0.
12-0. I know.
If the Rockies had just won one or two games, that would have been the difference.
No, I agree. Oh, every Giants fan feels the same way. My friend Marco, who covers games with me as well, and and is one of the editors in chief of Bay Area Sports Wrap. He hates the Rock, and I hate the Rockies. I mean, to me, I can think of no other franchise that's more effing pathetic than the Rockies. They're dead last in the National League this year again.
Yeah.
That franchise has done nothing. I mean, other than the fact that they played in a nice ballpark. You know, Charlie Blackmon's a great player, and they've had a lot of great offensive players. Todd Helton got in the Hall of Fame recently, but to me, like Todd Helton had a meaningless career because he played for the most part with mediocre teams, and the Rockies have had so many sub 500 years with guys that can hit the ball far because of course they cheated back then too because they didn't use a humidor. They basically used baseballs that dried up to the point where they were like wiffle balls, and that's why you could blast them out of Coors Field. I hate the Rockies. I absolutely hate the Rockies. There's nothing more I can't stand than that team. So anytime the Rockies play, I want the other team who they're playing against just to beat the crap out of them.
Oh my God. Bad memories there. Anyway, yeah, I agree with you. 93 was a fun team. And then you had your runs in the early 2000s as well. But boy, it's a far cry for that offense now, and that's the problem. I was sitting there Saturday, just kind of looking over at you, just going, I mean, there's no fight. There's nothing.
Nope.
It's just
Nothing.
whiff, whiff, whiff. It's just nothing. The strikeouts are piling up. The lack of contact with runners on scoring position. It was just there's no hope. I mean, I remember you stay in your seat to watch. A Barry Bonds and Ellis Burke and Andres Galarraga, a JT Snow, a Jeff Kent, whatever. Nowadays, I'm like, okay, Tyler Fitzgerald's hot. Other than him, I'm like, who am I?
Ramos.
Yeah, Ramos is hot, and he hit another one, whatever yesterday. But it's just, you just don't expect anything, and the way this team is hitting. But things have got to change. I don't know what the long-term solution is in terms of attracting hitters here. Obviously, they've moved in the fences a little bit. But other than continually moving into fences, I don't think there's
they
a
should
solution
do honestly.
to it.
The best thing I could think of really that would help them, and it did change the wind patterns. Close off the port walk.
Yeah. I mean, I know
Closing
that
off the
upset
port
some
walk.
Giants fans.
You remember? Whatever. I mean, hey, remember Alex Dickerson?
Yeah.
Dick. Well, anyway, he used to get home runs because that was during the time when the port walk was closed.
Yeah. That's right.
The ball travels better when the port walk is closed. So if the Giants want to do anything to change the offense, close the port walk. I mean, I maybe they should do a thing where I don't know. I mean, I would just close the port walk off because if it really does improve the offense and you can actually get the ball to fly a little bit better. Yeah, maybe it's time to get rid of the port walk. I mean, who really watches from there anyway? You can't see much.
It's funny. I've never stood there for a game. I've looked in there during when there was not a game, but. Never been there.
And how well could you see the field?
Not very well. I mean, obviously you can
there you
chat
go.
with the left
Close
fielder.
Off
That's
the
about
port.
it.
But I'll say this: it is really tough to get people to want to play there. I mean, if you're a pitcher, and that's why a guy like Logan Webb can thrive there, and there's potential for Blake Snell. Although I think he's gone after this season. I think he's
for sure.
agency and leave. And
100%.
And I think in some ways the Giants maybe should have traded him. Because maybe the idea that's Farhan gaslighting fans. But it is so hard to hit the ball at Oracle Park. I mean, I always tell the story to other people, and I talked to one of the Braves writers when they were here for the series, and I said how I saw Jeff Kent take batting practice just blasting balls to left field, and I don't know, 8 out of 10 of them would just die at the warning track. And these balls were all looked like they were headed out of the ballpark, and as soon as it got towards the outfield, it just died because the ball doesn't carry there. It just doesn't. Yeah. And it carries better in the daytime, just like Candlestick, right? The ball carried pretty well at day games for Candlestick Park, but night games, man, it just balls go to die. And and you just can't get people to want to play there. It's like, as you know, living in California is very expensive. Athletes want to, save every dollar they can. And that's why a lot of them play in like places like Arizona and Florida and, where it's warmer weather, taxes are less. And I just don't know how the Giants can compete with that. I don't know. And the thing is too is the nature of baseball has really changed since 2014. I mean that's when all the analytics really started taking off. And what do you know? 2014 coincides with the last Giants championship.
Yeah, that's true. And you were mentioning a little nugget yesterday. You're asking me when was the last player, who and when was the last player to hit 100 RBI for the Giants? And I thought about it for a second. I got the right answer. But it took a while because I was like, damn, it has been that long. But, of course, it's Buster Posey, his MVP season of 2012. And so it's been 12 years because they're not having another one this year. since the Giants have hit one. And certainly since Bonds has hit 30 home runs, has a Giant not gotten there. So we have Chapman at 19, but he's not going to get to 30. So another year will go by. And yeah, I mean, the Giants just have so much to correct. And they still have a farm system which you think would be better by now because that's what Farhan specializes in. And yet they're ranked in the bottom 10 in all of baseball through most of the major magazines and analysts. So there's no obvious improvement there as well. So it's just frustrating. I'm glad I'm not a White Sox fan. I get it. But at the same time, it's just this stale vanilla, cereal in the cupboard. And it's just like, man, we got to get some like Fruit Loops going here. I mean, I want something tasty. Let's go.
Yeah, well, you're not going to get it. I mean, do you know who the team leaders are right now for the Giants right now when it comes to like home runs and RBIs and what it is?
Well, yeah, we got Chapman and home runs. And actually, I didn't think average because Fitzgerald, of course, doesn't qualify if you're talking about minimum.
Yeah, so at least when it comes to – yeah, I wonder about qualifier, but you're right. Yeah, right now, like Chapman's got a 245 average, 19 homers, 61 RBIs, and he's not even going to crack 80 RBIs for the year.
Yeah. I know. It's – they're just bad numbers. And you get, I don't expect Aaron Judge numbers, but, you got to have something in here. Arizona's pumping out runs like there's no tomorrow.
I was thinking about this too. I know why you chose the name for your podcast, but it's funny. At least back in those days, torture meant the fact that the Giants were, kind of making things kind of interesting, but they would still find ways to win.
Yep.
Now you're actually, it really is torture because it's almost like some kind of water torture where you got a drop of water just hitting your head constantly and just I don't know. But it's not torture with a positive outcome.
No, it's a different type of torture. You're 100% right. It was good torture back in the day. Now it's bad torture.
That's bad torture, and I really don't. Yeah, and the last thing I want to point out too is I just think that the differences now too from when you started to now is where does baseball rank with popularity? I mean, even like over the weekend, did you know who wasn't actually at those games on Saturday and Sunday? KNBR wasn't there as far as like their digital team.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
wow.
Because they just. I remember I talked to somebody I know who works in their digital team. I was like, "How come I didn't see you guys there over the weekend?" He just shrugs. They don't care. I mean, like they care. They care only because they're a partner and a rights holder. But outside of certain people that have to talk about the Giants, I mean, most people these days, it's all about the Niners and it's all about the Warriors.
Right. Wow.
That's a bigger problem too. That doesn't even talk about the Giants. That's a problem for the sport. I just think baseball. You and I enjoy it because we grew up on it. But I gotta admit, I in the last like 5 years, I have very little knowledge of what's going on around the league, and the game itself just isn't marketed very well anymore. I mean, when you go to like look at a game now and look at the rosters of teams, like how many players can you really identify?
Oh, I used to know almost the starting lineup of every team and their numbers and everything, and that's just not the same anymore. Not at all.
No, it's not.
I totally agree with you
the
there.
A's have and the A's have some players that are actually. I mean, the A's are actually more of an up and up than the Giants are. They've actually got some young, promising players. But I got to admit, when you try to follow baseball coverage now, it used to be we could watch Baseball Tonight, 1-2 times a night, and they do some really good analysis. Now it's down to watching quick pitch and some pretty girls giving the highlights. I mean, I don't mind the eye candy; it's nice, but they're not. There's no analysis whatsoever.
No, it's very shallow. It's just reporting.
It's very shallow, and even when they do these talking shows, and I can't even follow it anymore because. Our family has YouTube TV, which doesn't have the MLB Network as a carrier.
I do too, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're not missing much though, because again, there's really nothing that the network itself provides. I mean, MLB Network when it first started in 2008, in theory was supposed to be this great network, and it was going to provide this avenue of coverage for baseball. But I find it to be incredibly shallow. There's nothing. It just provides nothing.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I was upset that YouTube TV dropped it and they couldn't work out a deal, but at the same time, I realized I don't really miss it. So
yeah, and again,
it's not that bad.
But I just think that's the bigger problem now is that I know you're a big Giants fan, and that's why you started your podcast. But I just like I said, the sport itself is just dying. I don't know how it's gonna try to keep it going for the next generation. Your son obviously is a big Niners fan. Does he follow baseball much?
No, he does not. I've tried, and he just doesn't really follow it. So he's definitely more into football.
But it's not his fault, though. I gotta admit, if I didn't know what I already knew about baseball and I was already kind of locked into it, I wouldn't watch it either. I mean, it just doesn't excite you, and and all the things that it's trying to do, and even these rule changes, like the whole 6 inning thing that we were talking about, and I know what they're trying to do, but everything's artificial. Baseball is a game such that the excitement for it should be more organic, and it's not that way. And only people that are still waxing poetic about it um, still feel that way. I think there was something with Mark Canna about the way he was able to win the game, and I know, and I'm using this as an example of a lady I know who's one of the official scorers said, "How could you not be romantic about baseball?" And I said, "Oh, I can think of a lot of ways." And I started talking about the A's leaving and the Expos having to move to from Montreal to DC, and yeah, the lure for baseball to me is gone, and the whole thing about watching Field of Dreams and sort of these whimsical movies like that are just a bunch of crock. It's a bunch of BS.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of like waking up and realizing there's no Santa sometimes, It's like, man, baseball was
Yeah.
definitely a different game back in the day, but,
And I think, yeah, and I think for us, we still like it because we can harken back and we think about that. And I
Mhm.
will say this: the Mays game, and you were there, right? As a fan, I saw that. That was fun. That was a good game to go to. The Giants did that right. I hope they don't do that every year, though. I hope they don't do this thing like Jackie Robinson, where everybody wears 24. I mean, I think the one-time deal for them to wear it in his passing
Sure.
was nice. And you got a couple of great moments that game. I mean, that catch that Ramos made was very
Oh,
Mays-esque. And
very.
then I think did what Tyler Fitzgerald make the other catch, right? That was right by the bullpen, where it used to
Yeah, I
be.
think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great catch. That was a great game. That was really cool. I got to admit, that was good.
Yeah. No,
But
that was a fun.
overall,
That was
baseball,
definitely a fun game.
yeah, but baseball overall doesn't have moments like that. It's really missing the kind of inspirational, fun stuff that you would want to watch. I mean, the Olympics, watching Steph Curry play for Team USA is certainly way better than any. I just, like I said, I just can't think of any recent baseball game that to me is interesting. And I'll close out on this. You remember the game they had at Rickwood for
Uh-huh.
honoring the Negro League teams? Was there one black player I think that played? I don't think so. The one guy who wanted
No,
to play
Lamont Wade
couldn't,
wanted to, yeah, but he couldn't.
and they wouldn't let him come
Exactly.
off the injured list early. Yep.
Yep. No, I agree with that. Yeah, that was interesting. That was interesting. But you're right. I mean, obviously, I'm still a Giants fan. Will always be one, and we'll still continue to watch baseball for those, magical moments that don't seem to happen as often anymore. But you're right. Like Steph Curry in the Olympics, shooting 4 daggers like that in the closing 3 minutes. That was insane. I mean,
Yeah.
he couldn't miss. And I mean, especially that last one over 2 guys, super,
Yep.
raindrop. It was like, you've
Uh-huh.
got to be kidding me.
And
Like,
he gave the
I
night. Yeah, he's just great. Yeah.
I don't remember seeing stuff like that since a guy like Bonds in a Giants uniform, right? Where
No,
I
you're
watched
right.
him
You're right.
hit 600 and 660, and I saw his 73rd home run off of the knuckleballer, like Russ Springer,
Yeah.
and
Right.
I just remember me being present for all of those magical moments, and they're so fewer and further between now.
And the
in
one
baseball
thing
in
that's
general.
different, right? And the one thing that's different about Bonds too, unfortunately, and I can say this, I covered him all the years he played, or at least that was I started in the late '90s. He didn't endear himself to people. Steph Curry is liked by everybody. I
Yeah.
mean, and he does come off. He's a genuine guy. Every time you talk to him, I've never seen Steph ever get really upset with anyone. Be like rude or mean, and we try to respect his space as much as possible, and he's just a good guy. So
Yeah.
I've never ever come across. See, if Bonds even had 10% of what Steph Curry is, Bonds would be in the Hall by now.
Yeah, he'd probably be in the Hall. I know he screwed himself there. Oh, we'll save that
He
for
did.
another show. We've done that before. Well, all
Yeah.
right. The Giants have 6 games this week? 3 against the White Sox at home, and then 3 up in Seattle. So hey, man, they're down to 30-something games left. They need to run the table one of these weeks to get back into it. So we'll be back next Monday, of course, for episode 306. In the meantime, you can follow us on the socials at TortureCast for the podcast, at ChadK21 for myself. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter, X, whatever the hell it's called right now. And of course, Ryan, you can find him at Ryan Leong and at BayAreaSportsRap.com. What else do you have to pimp or talk about to our listeners?
That's pretty much it. I mean, I've been like we said, I'm I'm in it for the long haul too, and I'm going to follow the Giants the rest of the way this season too. But I really just hope that something happens where they get a little bit of a spark and just try to create some fire out of something. Just try to make it interesting, because it's really. I mean, this is trying for fans. It really is, and again, not just for Giants fans. I think for baseball fans in general. Just
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Got to do something to try to get something more interesting about baseball, just to change the entire
Yeah.
the nature of the sport, because
Ghost runners don't do it for me. I'm just saying.
That's terrible. I mean, that's just a terrible. It's awful. I mean, I'm glad that Mike Kruko, even though he's adopted to some changes, agrees how much he hates the Ghost Runner. I hate it too. And again, I know it was created for two reasons, right? It was so you didn't have endless long extra inning games, and second was so you don't blow out your bullpen. But you got to have a better way to try to end a game than this. I don't know. It's like it's kind of like hockey in a shootout, but even that's better than watching this. I mean, this is obvious. This is the most unsatisfying and unfulfilling way to end a sporting event.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, man. But we're gluttons for punishment. We'll continue to do it. But anyway, Ryan, I really want to thank you for coming on and spending an hour of your time. Yeah. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the talk, especially kind of your perspective and some of the Giants' history and covering this game for so long. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Okay, you got it, Chad. Anytime. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. All right, we'll be back for episode 306 next week. Until then, have a good week. Go Giants. Boom.
A big thank you to everybody for listening to the Torture Cast, the podcast by and for fans of the San Francisco Giants. Follow us on Twitter at TortureCast. You can also like us on Facebook or check out our blog at torturecast.com. I also want to say thank you to Ashcon and Bailey for letting us use their song Feeling Like a Giant for our intro. For Ben Lee and Chad King, my name is Willie Dills saying, we'll see you next time.